were very clear in your government to try and open up your nation to investment from China. Clearly, that's not what's going on between the US and China at the moment. Does the UK have a fundamentally different perspective of the benefits of a trade relationship because of our relative economic size?
Well, I think that my approach was to try and have a positive relationship with China through opening up and through partnerships. China is rising. We're not going to put a stop to that. The question is, can we make sure China rises safely? And I think that means that when you want to try and include them in the institutions we establish, the IMF and UN and World Bank, and when they want to establish new institutions, genuine multilateral ones, we should do that too. But to be fair to President Trump and the Americans, look, there are abuses over copyright infringements and intellectual property and the like. And perhaps it is time for some tougher action. But I think there's risks involved in these tariff wars, and there are dangers from them getting out of control.
Given where we are, if you were in his shoes, would you up the ante from here or soften it?
I wouldn't. I think that, for instance, here we are in the stock exchange. I think actually America benefits from Chinese companies coming to list here, just as Britain benefits from Chinese companies wanting to invest in Britain, grow in Britain, and list on the London Stock Exchange. So I would think that, it'd probably benefit London if New York were to do that, but I wouldn't advise it.
What about your view on the eurozone as things stand? Clearly faced an enormous sovereign debt crisis during your time. Is that possible to happen in the next 5 to 10 years again?
Well, I worry about the stability of the euro. I mean, one of the reasons I launched, in fact, the main reason, the biggest reason for trying to have a renegotiation and referendum was to recognize that the eurozone was driving change in Europe. Those eurozone countries are inevitably going to have a deeper union amongst themselves. They're going to have more coordinated fiscal policy, more coordinated banking action. That has consequences for Britain. And I worry, in a way, if they do those things. I was worried about how Britain would relate to that. But I also worry if they don't do those things, will the eurozone be able to cope with the next financial crisis that comes along? And I think that is a real worry.
To your point, though, if they do those things, and they've also, since the referendum, committed to trying to move towards a centralised military, how would a second referendum go if it was played again? Well,
Britain has always had a special place within the EU. We're not in the eurozone. We're not in the no-borders zone. My negotiation carved us out of ever closer political union. The only way Britain works in the EU, in my view, is by carving out a special place. And what I was trying to do was make it more special. But if we could only, Britain will never, in my view, sign up to membership of the euro or indeed membership of the no-border zone. It's not in our interests and we shouldn't do it.
Going a little off topic here, David, one thing that stood out for me in the book, you were very critical of President Obama as it related to Syria. You said, quote, he lost his nerve, and that, quote, his handling of Assad is still the thing I regret most about his entire presidency. Was that solely Obama's fault?
Well, generally speaking, I'm very polite about Barack Obama. I really enjoyed working with him.
Can't blame me for picking up on that
fair
quote.
enough, but just to balance it up and advise people to look at the whole book. I mean, my view is that it was great that the leader of the most important country in the world was humane, decent, hard-working, a good man. But on Syria, I felt that our response to the chemical weapons attack, a red line was crossed. We should have agreed between us before it happened what the reaction was going to be. I then lost that vote in the House of Commons, which was a matter of huge regret. And I think more generally, when you look at Syria, of course, Iraq shows us the perils of intervention. Syria shows us the perils of non-intervention. Look at the lives that have been lost, the refugee crisis, the fillip that it gave to ISIS and terrorism. It has been a failure for the West, and one where I think we could have done more if we'd worked harder.
Is the US at the moment at risk of failing to back its ally Saudi Arabia against Iran?
No, I don't think it is. I think my concern with this situation is that the Iran deal that Barack Obama and I and others agreed, it was imperfect. It could have been better. Of course, all these deals could be better, but it did at least keep Iran verifiably away from having a nuclear weapon. And I worry that by backing out of it, we've created a more unstable world and a more uncertain world, and that's going to leave us with some very hard choices.
My final question, David, when the dust settles on your career in many decades' time, how do you hope you'll be remembered?
Well, of course, this Brexit vote is a huge event for the United Kingdom and for Europe, but I hope people will take a balanced view and say, look, he modernised the Conservative Party, got it back into power, ran the first coalition government for 70 years, restored Britain's economic fortunes, dealt with the deficit, and did some things I'm very proud of, like being the first centre-right leader to embrace and pass gay marriage, as well as keeping our promises to the poorest countries in the world. So there's a good record there, but obviously at the moment, and for perhaps some time to come, this Brexit question is going to loom very large for my country.
David, it's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
David Cameron there. Morgan, back to you.